Our study through the Old Testament here on Mondays. We are currently in the book of Isaiah, and we make it to the 13th chapter. So very quickly, just kind of as an intro to it, the first 12 chapters that we've been looking through has been looking primarily at Judah, and though it has things to say with Israel, it talks a little bit about the political things that are happening at the time and what world powers are around. Assyria has been addressed in that. There's a lot of messianic information that's covered in that. But what we have here in chapters 13 through 27, he addresses no fewer than 10 other nations that God is speaking about that he is going to judge coming down through the ages. So we're going to have some observations that we'll make about that and what we see in this chapter. He begins with Babylon, and that's going to be chapters 13 and 14. We're just going to deal with 13 today, and it has some very, very interesting things. As far as how we handle prophecy, this is a really, really good case study in how do we look at a particular passage and say, is this looking at something in the short term as Isaiah sees it, or is it looking at something in the long term? And how do we know the difference? And so this is a great, great way for us to address that particular topic. So something I also want to be able to do, and we'll do this at the close in the apologetics things that we do. I want to share with you what happened Sunday morning or Saturday morning last. And we were at church and getting together for the men's fellowship, and the topic of the gospel came up. And so just what is the gospel? And we use it so loosely and we use it so commonly that I don't know how much we really stop to think about the actual word and what exactly is it. So we might know just the dictionary definition of it is just good news, but it is so far beyond that. And we're going to look at that over the next couple of weeks, maybe three. Our next studies, the next 2 or 3 studies, we'll look at that a little bit more in depth. But it's fascinating nonetheless. So I want to do that with you afterwards. We'll take care of the 13th chapter here in Isaiah. And as a reminder, we have the trip going to Israel, and I know I have a few people that I'm waiting to hear back from that had expressed interest in this, and so we're just trying to get our final numbers of people. Payment needs to be in by the 20th of February, so we're in February now. And again, it's going to be a smaller group than what we had first thought, but that's kind of good too. So we don't have to worry about as much with the crowds. The smaller the group, the easier it is to go. And it is going to get insanely busy come the fall. And so the window to go, if you want to go and avoid the crowds, is kind of now. Or probably sometime in 28. I don't have really plans to go in 27. It's going to be pretty busy because people are now wanting to go back there after all the problems that had happened since October 23 of 2023. So anyhow, if you have interest in any of these things that I'm going to be talking about today, or if you'd like information about the trip, we'd love to have you join us. It's once in a lifetime thing, life-changing, absolutely. This will be the 8th group that I've taken there. And it's something that definitely changes the lives of the people who go. So if you've not been before and you're kind of on the fence about going, contact me as soon as you can. If you have any questions, I can answer them. If there's anything that you're apprehensive about that would keep you from wanting to go, let me know, because you might very well have heard things that are just not cause for concern. And if I could give you information that might help you with that, maybe you benefit from it. And once again, you will be a changed person when you come back from there. There's no question about it. So with all that being said, we are going to turn to the 13th chapter of Isaiah. And some things I want to just kind of get out of the way if I could. As we look at this 13th chapter, it is good for us to remember as we look at these chapters here through 27, God is going to be addressing directly the nation in these first 2 chapters of Babylon. He'll talk to Egypt and other ones that he'll mention, Moab, the surrounding nations. And his point is, he's going to be doing things in ways of judgment towards them for things that they have done, things that they will do. Remembering that as we see this, Babylon's not even the power on the planet at the time. And so thinking about it from that point of view, what Isaiah sees here is really a major change in what is the world order at the time. He's already talked about the ones that are really on the ascendancy in the world at the time being the Assyrians. And they hadn't really created the problems for Judah that they will later, and yet he's already addressed them. The Assyrians are not they're going to be overtaken as a world power by the Babylonians, though the Babylonians don't go and conquer them in the normal sense of things. So as Isaiah is seeing this, Assyria is really the world power at the time on the ascendancy, and he sees Babylon here and singles them out for judgment, and he even mentions the Medes, and it is the Medo-Persians who end up attacking Babylon and ends up taking them out in world history. So that the idea that Babylon would not even come to do the damage that they are going to do to Judah is still 100 years down the road. And the Medo-Persians overtaking the Babylonians is even after that. So what Isaiah is seeing here is well into the future. And yet this is the God of the nations. Whether the nations will ever admit or even acknowledge that God exists, he's still the sovereign of the universe. He's going to oversee all things. So this is him saying in advance, here's what I'm going to do. So it's we're going to see again that the wording of the day of the Lord. God has already spoken about the day of the Lord through Isaiah at this point. He's going to continue to say it as it pertains to Babylon. Now, because of that, it means that there are things still future as far as Babylon is concerned from our point of view. And if not for the book of Revelation, there's a lot of stuff here that might not necessarily make a great deal of sense. So whoever read this the first time, remember that it's for the people in Judah in particular, above everyone else, to know that, yeah, there are things that are going to happen through your time, and the difficulty is there, but your oppressors and the ones who have given you problems through the ages will all have their moment of reckoning. And that is covered here. Now, it's an interesting way that we have to start looking at this when we think of the prophetic things, because God sees the entirety of a particular nation or any person, even down to the individual. Everything that's known about them, anything that they will ever do, whether it's nation or individual humans, it's all known to God. So there's nothing that's hidden from him. He's the God of the nations. Interestingly enough, as Israel reads this, it would be somewhat comforting to them, Judah in particular, because the day will come when all the oppressors will have their moment. But they couldn't possibly even recognize what was being said here and how it would ultimately play out. So the people who were hearing this for the very first time, as Isaiah is reading this, and as he's receiving it and writing it down, of course, this would sound very odd to him. That we're talking about Babylon when they're not even the people they're not the big ones on the block. Now, Babylon is known. Babylon is, of all the nations or all the cities and that are mentioned in the Bible, whether we call it Babel onward, that's still the same place. The same location, the city of Babylon, is ancient, and it's, aside from Jerusalem, it's mentioned more than any other city in the scriptures. So that helps us to understand that what is traditionally Babylon is something that we should really understand when we look at the book of Revelation, because there are things that God says about the actual city here in Isaiah that must make us understand that when we read the book of Revelation, why would we ever stop believing it in the literal sense? Because what God says is going to happen to Babylon, the actual city, is spoken about here in Isaiah, and it's never happened historically. So if we take what is being said here in Isaiah and apply it to what we see in Babylon, really Revelation is giving us the fulfillment ultimately of this. So that helps us in our understanding when it comes to prophetic passages. Is it now at the time? Is it down the road? Is it a mixture of the two things? And there's, I think, a better way of governing how we look at that. And it is simply this. When God sees the nation, he sees it in its entirety. So when God is pronouncing judgment on Babylon, he's announcing judgment on it in all of its configurations over the ages, from the time that this is written until its ultimate demise and doom. So there are things that he says that are going to take place and happen to Babylon that have simply not ever happened to this time. If we look at the book of Revelation, since it mentions Babylon, it's either going to be seen by some as being figuratively speaking about something else, or it's being spoken of literally. And there's a whole different school that doesn't believe anything about Revelation, that it is even something that has to be taking place future. But if we're looking at it in the future sense, people try to make it something else, from the United Nations to Jerusalem to the United States. But here God speaks to the nation of Babylon in particular direct terms, and it is to them that he is speaking about things that he will do, and the only interpretation that fits has to be literal, and that is taken in conjunction with what we see in Revelation, and then it all fits. It all works. It's when you start playing fast and loose with these things and trying to make it say something that it doesn't say, whether it's Isaiah or the book of Revelation, that you start to get into all kinds of problems and folly. So as far as God is concerned here, and he addresses the nation of Babylon, or the city of Babylon, but really the Babylonian Empire, he mentions them. And again, for us to read the book of Revelation, if we read it in the literal sense and don't do violence to it by making it into something as metaphor or analogous to something, and all the butchery that takes place of that book, if we just take it for what it is and realize that nothing in it that is described has ever happened accurately, historically, there must still be things to be fulfilled. So it's with that we take a look at this in these passages. And when it comes to the idea, is it near prophecy? Is it far prophecy? In this case, when it comes to Babylon, it's as though God says, Babylon in its entirety, let me tell you everything that will happen to it from this time forward, and then it all fits. Because we could say, well, when did that happen to Babylon? Well, if it didn't, it will. And we know that to be the case, again, because of Revelation. And it's why the importance of looking at the book of Revelation as a literal document of things future. Mainly, almost all of it is devoted to future. After chapter 3, it's all after. And Babylon is actually mentioned by name. And actually, it entails the beginning of or at the end of the 16th chapter, and 17th and 18th chapter are really kind of dedicated to all things Babylon. The spiritual aspect of it, the literal place, the commercial aspect of it, all that stuff. So let's turn to chapter 13, and let's have a word of prayer, and we'll dig into the text. Father, we thank you again that we can come before you and study your word and have these things made mention to us that are mentioned to us. You can make sense of them if we will put aside whatever bias we may have and actually read it for what it says, and then look to the historical. Has it taken place yet? And if not, when? So we ask, Lord, that you would help us and give us all of the assistance necessary by the Holy Spirit for us to look at these matters and see why they are things that we should pay attention to, and why do they matter. So we give you thanks, we give you all praise, and pray that you would guide this study, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So what we read in the first 5 verses, is really something that you read and you would say, okay, when is this supposed to happen? And so it's best for us to be able to look at it and say, if we look at this and we say it hasn't yet happened like this, in this case, it's really all the nations that would come against it. We would want to say that just from the very first 5 verses, we would say, great. When? We know who's being spoken of here, but is there a context to it, and will the chapter help us to understand what that actually is? So we see in verses 1 to 5, we read this: the burden against Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amos saw. Now again, a burden would be an oracle, a prophecy. And so what God is saying here, there's this oracle, this burden, this thing that he has given to Isaiah to carry and then to make known. It becomes very much a prophetic writing. So it says, lift up a banner on the high mountain, raise your voice to them, wave your hand that they may enter into the gates of the nobles. I have commanded my sanctified ones. I have also called my mighty ones for my anger, those who rejoice in my exaltation. The noise of a multitude in the mountains, like that of many people, a tumultuous noise of the kingdoms of the nations gathered together. The Lord of hosts musters the army for battle. They come from far country and from the ends of heaven. The Lord and his weapons of indignation to destroy the whole of the land. Now, when we read that, we can think, okay, Babylon is the issue, and this is the oracle against them. It's the prophecy against them. So there are people that almost instantaneously start to think, okay, how do we spiritualize this? It can't literally be Babylon. They're not even on the world stage yet. It must be speaking in somehow metaphor, or it's analogous to something else. This is, again, going to run all the way through chapter 27. This is actually God just telling you, I'm going to do this to these nations, and I'm telling you all of this in advance. For him, it's no big deal. He sees all of human history all at once. It's like one timeline to him. He's outside of time. So he can see from the creation that he did until the end of things, it's all right out in front of him in a timeline. And we look at those all the time. We have them in church, and it's the timeline of whenever this happened to this happened, that span of time, we know all the little details in between. And we know them in big picture. They're historical to us. If the narrower we get it, the more we can tell you with detail. So we can lay out a timeline of our whole day, that if my wife comes home later on this afternoon and says, well, what did you do today? I can give her a breakdown, kind of point by point, everything that I did during the course of the day. Imagine being God, who knows the minutia of it beyond, like to the subatomic level. He knows all of human history for every single person, everything that has ever been done or ever will be done, in the most minute of detail for all of creation. That's his ability. So he sees everything in front of him like we would look at a timeline. So when God says, this is what I'm going to do to Babylon, then we start to look at the particulars and say, okay, so is he talking about what he's going to do in the near future or somewhere down the road? If we were to ask God that, well, what do you mean? Like now or somewhere down the road? God's just able to say, I'm talking about Babylon in its entirety. So when you read the internals of this, you would say, okay, well, that's already taken place, but that definitely has not. And we have the assistance of the book of Revelation, which really helps to give us a lot of detail. In fact, what we see here, though it has a great deal of detail, we wonder what else has to take place before that happens, because there are some other things said in here that goes well beyond Babylon. But yet this is an oracle against them. So what we'll find is that he's saying there are things I'm going to do against Babylon while I'm doing things elsewhere in the world at the same time, which of course would beg us to say, well, when is that going to take place, or has it already taken place? And if not, we become students of the Bible to find that out. So these first 5 verses, there are some interesting things that are worth being pointed out here. Again, we've already determined who this is being spoken against. It is Babylon. Verse 2, this is what you would do if an army is to advance. So the people that would be leading the army, and we think of just back then, not the way that things are done now, when it was all hand to hand and you had one army on one side and one army on another. There's the raising of the banners, the people that are in charge, the king and all of his generals, the people who are not in the hand to hand but are giving the directions. They're the ones that are on the more elevated area, and they're the ones who are calling out what's to be done. Banners are raised. That's where people rally. If you want to have somebody down in the valley do something, you raise up a flag and you give them direction that way. So it's just helping us to understand in terms that are as ancient as possible. So again, if he's trying to say this about what warfare will look like in the future of even our time, he wouldn't say, well, they're going to get on the radios and they'll do this, that, and the other thing, and their communication's completely different. So the point is, he's using ancient idioms and ancient ways that these things would be done, and we have no problems relating to it and understanding. So we know exactly what's being said here. This is God gathering the people together, and they are raising the banner, rallying the troops, and they're going to move against Babylon. That's what's being spoken of here. So he says, lift up a banner on the high mountain and raise your voice to them. Wave your hand. Now that's to the armies, the people who were assembled. Raise your voice to them, wave your hand, that they may enter the gates of the nobles. That's when they go into Babylon, then let them go ahead and just go through the gates. Now, it's not looking at any one particular thing, because they didn't go through the gates when it was the Persians. They went underneath the dammed up water source going into Babylon. So it wasn't through the gates. So there's obviously much more that's being spoken of here historically. So again, remember, God is looking at this as Babylon, and if you want to, all the way back when it first became an offense to him. So the Tower of Babel, we're talking about the same place. And God had confounded them because their point was, we're gonna run everything. Nimrod was the first real kind of world, I'm looking to dominate everything. God split them up at that point. We're talking about ancient history. So when God sees Babylon, he sees it in its entirety from beginning to end. So he's speaking about these things when he pronounces his judgment. It will have a number of things that will harm it over the years. So again, it will fall to the Medo-Persians. They will take over Babylon. That'll happen during the captivity of many of the Jewish people. That's Ezekiel, it's Daniel, it's Esther, it's Ezra, it's Nehemiah. It's all of that era of history. They will cease being the world power. They'll be absorbed into the Persians, but God speaks about them in Revelation as being reestablished, and he's going to allow that to take place. So it's with that he says, I have commanded my sanctified ones. And by sanctified, it means set apart. Now, set apart, oftentimes whenever we see sanctified, we think of it in the good terms. But let's just look at the actual term itself. It just means the ones who are separated out for a particular task. So to us, as believers, we would be considered the sanctified, or we're going through the process of separation, sanctifying and being selected out from and being taken out from the rest. In this case, exact same thing. These are the people that God has used at this time. They're the ones he has set apart for this. Doesn't mean that they care anything about him. It just means they're the vessel that he is going to use, which is really important for our day and much of the debate in the church. Is that how can Israel actually be the Israel that we know of in Scripture, that God's going to do this work through, because they were brought in through secular sources, they're not walking with him, they're not this, they're not that. All these excuses and reasons why Israel can't be the ones that God is choosing to work through in these days, they're not called to him. And so here, notice what God uses. He's going to bring judgment, and he's going to use people who don't even pay attention to him to bring about his larger goal, the things that he wants to do. So he refers to them as sanctified, not spiritually, but separated out for the task that he has put before them. So I have commanded my sanctified ones, and I have also called my mighty ones in my anger, or for the purposes of my anger. So a mighty army is being drawn by him for the purposes of his anger. And the English is a little clunky here, where it says, and those who rejoice in my exaltation. So it's that they rejoice in the fact that I, God, am going to use them to exalt myself. Though they will think that they're the ones doing all of this, they're really ultimately just my vessel. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. They are just simply ones that I am using for my bigger goals, my purposes. Verse 4, the noise of a multitude in the mountain like that of many people, a tumultuous noise of the kingdoms of nations gathered together. The Lord of hosts musters the army for battle. They come from a far country and from the end of heaven. The Lord and his weapons of indignation to destroy the entirety or the whole of the land. So, question that first pops up. Who's being spoken of here? Who are these nations? What does this mean? So we know that the people who would ultimately, again, we still have to wait in this history as Isaiah's writing it. Babylon still needs to become the primary, the primary power in the world. They currently are not. Assyria is. In the wake of Assyria's toppling, Babylon will take that on. But they are not even ascendant yet. But when they become that person, there will be a day, or that nation rather, that God will move against them. So that is the first question that we ask. When is this going to take place? That the follow-up to that was, well, maybe we should read on because maybe God gives us more detail. We don't have enough to go on, but we do know this. There's one particular thing that has happened to Babylon that has happened in times past, and Persia is the best example of this. So is it possible that God is speaking about Persia, and can all of this be explained away just by the Persians conquering the Babylonians when they come in under King Cyrus? And rather than trying to go over the walls and think Daniel chapter 5, that's when all that happens, they think that they're going to be able to just do what they want to do. It's no big deal, right? So the Babylonians are living in a false sense of security by that time, and the Persians just say, hey, we'll just stop the water up and we'll walk in through the aqueducts that go into the city, and we'll take it before they even know it. So that's what ended up happening. History tells us that. So with that, Is that what's being spoken of here? Are we talking about the Persians, and is that the end of it all? Let's read some of the details about it. So, wail, why? For the day of the Lord is at hand. Now we add a wrinkle, because we know that the day of the Lord has already been spoken of here, and the day of the Lord is something that we hear all the time in the Old Testament. Yet, many people, when they hear day of the Lord, they think New Testament. They think Revelation. They think the stuff that Paul would be talking about, 2 Thessalonians 2, the day of the Lord in 1 Thessalonians 5, those kind of things, the end of the world kind of stuff, the Armageddon things. Well, here the day of the Lord is also Old Testament, and it's spoken about at the same event. So it's when we take all of the available information, both Old and New Testament, it is speaking with one voice. What's best for us is to take a look at any place that we can look at the day of the Lord stuff. Joel chapter 2, chapter 3. Honestly, there's just way too many to even think about trying to do a thorough reckoning of it. What we're talking about, multiple prophets, multiple chapters, volumes of the Old Testament are dedicated to this day. So again, with Joel, you're talking about the second and third chapter is speaking about those things. And the day of the Lord is not meant to be a 24-hour cycle like a Tuesday. It is a day or a period of time, indeterminate unless you look at the details of it, if you can look at it as an after-the-fact matter. So the day of the Lord is speaking about a time when he pours out his judgment. We would call it the tribulation. And that's when you can find out that the things mentioned here only fit during that time, and it's because we have the book of Revelation that tells us these details, because things that we're about to read have never happened historically. So that's what tells us, okay, what we've read, we know that there's, in the somewhat near future, within a few hundred years, a couple of hundred years, this is all going to come to pass, that the Persians will end up doing what they do to the Babylonians. It's within a couple hundred years in that time frame. But it is nowhere near the description that we get here. So, wail, for the day of the Lord is at hand. It will come as destruction from the Almighty. So here again, God of the nations. He is the one who is in charge of this timepiece. It is he who will make these things come to pass. So, therefore, all hands will be limp, and every man's heart will melt, and they will be afraid. Pangs and sorrows will take hold of them, and they will be in pain as a woman in childbirth. Imagery that we're familiar with from other places as well. And so we don't have to look at this and say, is there one place where this is all speaking about, and is this the only place where these kinds of descriptions are given? And the simple answer is, well, of course not. It's actually very common language about the day of the Lord, and it's really going to kind of go into the description of how devastating this will be, not just to the nation, but to the people, and the fear that will happen when this all comes to pass. Now, when the Babylonians come, not the Babylonians, but the Persians, when they come in and when it all happens, we read history of this, and it's the history that's read into a little bit, but there are, the way that it's described is that so stealthy was the overtaking of Babylon. If you lived within the walls of Babylon, you wouldn't have even known that you were conquered right away. But when they finally came in, again, it would have taken place as far as the nobles were concerned, the palace, all that kind of stuff. That's what you take first. But the rank and file people, since it wasn't a siege, it wasn't a breaching of the wall, it wasn't a breaking through of the gates, it was very quietly go in and take the city. So the stuff that's being spoken of here is not necessarily all that good of an explanation that it was just the Medo-Persians. They fit portions of this, but nowhere near the description that we get the more that we read on. So, this is what happens to them. Therefore, all the hands will be limp, every man's heart will melt. They're overwhelmed, and they're just paralyzed by fear once they come to an understanding. So again, we're going to ask the question, when would this happen, and when did it happen? Or has it yet to occur? And they will be afraid, pangs and sorrows will take hold of them. They will be in pain as a woman in childbirth, and they will be amazed at one another. Their faces will be like flames. The idea that it's flushed, it's just that fury that happens, the fierceness of just being paralyzed with fear. And just you'll be able to see it on their faces. That's what's supposed to be captured here. That momentary terror when everything just comes to light. That's what's being explained here. Behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel, and both wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate, and he will destroy its sinners from it. For the stars of heaven and their constellations will not give their light. The sun will be darkened in its going forth, and the moon will not cause its light to shine. When does that happen? So there would be people that would say, well, it's figurative language, it's metaphor, it's speaking about, just the common day-to-day of the way that things happen. When the Persians came in and did that, it was like, the whole world kind of ceased to exist. Well, that is the exact same language that we read in the book of Revelation. So it's speaking about it happening to Babylon. We have people that would say that what is being spoken of in the book of Revelation is only speaking about what happened at the hands of the Romans to Jerusalem. Well, which is it? Is it Babylon or is it Jerusalem? Well, it's clearly not Jerusalem that's being spoken of here. It's literally Babylon, because Jerusalem has already been addressed in the first chapters, in the first 12 chapters. Now God's turning his attention towards the nation. Babylon here in chapter 13 is not metaphorically, allegory, whatever, some lame excuse. It's not speaking in some symbolic way of Jerusalem. It's Babylon. It's speaking of Babylon. So whatever happens in the book of Revelation to try to make it fit what took place at 70 AD at the hands of the Romans is just doing violence to the text. So what's being spoken of here is literal physical phenomenon in the heavens. This is something that we only see, well, not only, let me be very careful. Joel speaks about this stuff. He talks about the same things. Peter quotes him in Acts chapter 2 from portions of chapter 2. In Joel, into chapter 3 is when we get even into more of that. The valley of Jehoshaphat, the valley of the battle that takes place there, of when the nations will come against Jerusalem. Separate entities, separate time, separate everything, but yet this is all the turmoil that's happening throughout the world in Revelation. Israel's going to be the prize, Jerusalem in particular, but God still has other things he's going to do elsewhere in the world, and Babylon is one of those places. So God's going to be doing a lot of things worldwide in that. And when you read Revelation and you read this and all the other prophets that speak about this, it fills out kind of puts flesh on the bone, if you will. So he speaks about this. Stars in the heavens will, and their constellations will not give their light. The sun will be darkened and in its going forth, and the moon will not cause its light to shine. So there are a number of places that you can look for this. Again, Jesus talks about it in his description of the things that will happen during the tribulation, chapter 24. Of Matthew, but then again, Revelation tells us about it. Joel talks about it. Here, Isaiah is speaking about it. So it's all, we want to make sure that we're talking about earthly phenomena that we've never watched happen. It's never taken place yet. So that would help us to say we can just kind of sweep them all up into one little pile and say, this is where it's being spoken of. All these prophets are talking about the same event. When does that event take place? And if it hasn't happened historically, then you have to read way too much into it to try to make it say something else. Let's take it in the literal sense, and it makes perfect sense. It's still future. It must still happen, which helps us to understand that when he's speaking about Babylon and the judgment against them, well, wait a minute, that doesn't sound like what the Persians would be doing. It must then be future. Remember, it's God who's watching this and saying, excuse me, I'm talking about Babylon in its entirety. So when I judge them, I will be judging them along the way. There will be events that will happen, but I'm talking about Babylon as a whole. God would reply to us when we're trying to figure out all the minutiae and make it fit. He's able to say, I'm talking about Babylon as a whole. So, verse 11 says, I will punish the world for its evil and the wicked for their iniquity. I will halt the arrogance of the proud, and I will lay low the haughtiness of the terrible. I will make a mortal more rare than fine gold, and more than the golden wedge of Ophir, the pure gold of Ophir. So when will this take place? Because clearly that's never happened. Well, it fits perfectly with what we read again in Revelation. So again, when God does this judgment of Babylon, notice how he changes a little bit of this to, oh, by the way, while that's all happening to Babylon, I will be doing these other things in the world. Now, I want to do a real quick little detour. Let's turn to the book of Revelation. Let's go to chapter 16. There's a very, very interesting thing that is said at the close of chapter 16. So in verse 17 we read this. The seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air, and with a loud voice came out of the temple of heaven from the throne, saying, "It is done." And there were noises and thunderings and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such as a mighty earthquake has never occurred since there were men upon the earth. Now, the great city was divided into three parts, and the cities of the nations fell, and great Babylon was remembered before the Lord to give her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath, and every island fled away, and the mountains were not found. And great hail from heaven fell upon each man, hailstones about the weight of a talent. Men blasphemed God because of the plague of the hail, since that plague was exceedingly great. And it says, then one of the seven angels came with of the seven bowls, who had the seven bowls, came and talked with me, saying, "Come, and I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits upon many waters." So the important part of this is that God remembered Babylon. So by this time, as we read in the book of Revelation, I believe without question that Babylon is rebuilt by this time. And we know that there's all kinds of things that have been going on in recent years of trying to do that very same thing, restoring the gardens that were there. And so it's an active thing that they're trying to do. The excavation and then trying to make it a place where all these things could once again function. And interestingly enough, when you read the description about Babylon, and I would, if you're not familiar with the ministry here and haven't been watching the channel for very long, you might not know this, but we've just finished the book of Revelation just months back, and we have those on the YouTube channel. You can go back and watch them, and you can go through and study these chapters with us, 16, 17, into 18 about Babylon. Now, I'll say this, and I made mention of it at the time, but you'll find people say it all the time. Oh, Mystery Babylon. And then they go into their riff about Mystery Babylon. Well, that's not even her name. And so when he's told, I'm going to show you, John, I will show you, this angel's going to show him, he shows him mystery. But what is her actual name? Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abomination of the abominations of the earth. So the mystery is revealed because he starts to give all the description. She's been a mystery to the people through the ages, but now Babylon is about to be exposed for who she is, and John is seeing it, and he's going to give us the details of what will become of her. But chapter 16 says God remembered Babylon. Not like he forgot her. It means everything that I said, like Isaiah and other places, it's going to come to pass now. God is going to, she's having her day of reckoning, which Revelation 17 and 18 gives us the perfect explanation of how these things actually do work. So you can compare Revelation 17 and 18 and say that is the fulfillment in its entirety of Isaiah 13 and 14 when it comes to the complete disillusionment, the complete destruction of Babylon. And so you can read, as just homework and as an aside, without all the detail, though I'd love it if you go back and watch the studies that we went through in 17 and 18. We took a few weeks doing it. But it's really important that we recognize that what God said he was going to do, the only way to make it fit perfectly is to see what he has to say about what he will do in Revelation. But remember, Isaiah wouldn't give all of those details because there's so much more that needs to take place. From Isaiah's point of view, Messiah needs to come. And Messiah is going to be the reason why man will have to make a decision whether to follow God or to rebel against him. And all of that is what's being dealt with, and God deals with the nations. Plural. Not just Babylon, not just Jerusalem, but all mankind. Those who dwell upon the earth is a term that you hear in the book of Revelation. So let's look at this and be really careful. Let's think about this briefly. what we see actually spelled out and the stuff that's kind of inferred from it is what Isaiah is seeing here, and the only way that we can understand it to where it doesn't have gaps is to say it's speaking about the times future to where we are currently that are going to be taking place in and around Israel, in and around Babylon, but in the entirety of the earth, because remember, he's already used that language. So when would all of these things be being done? Where he's going to use all the nations and do all these things, Babylon being the prize, but where he's also pouring out his wrath upon the entirety of the earth, and there would be actual physical phenomenon in the heavens and on the earth, earthquakes and all that kind of stuff. So again, put all the pieces together and say, if it doesn't fit historically, put it in a separate section of saying, it will come to pass. It's the only way that it fits. And that's when you start to piece together things like Isaiah 13, Isaiah 14, and then, of course, Revelation, Joel, just on and on and on. It's all throughout. And again, it's one of the reasons why God does this. It's so integrated that even if you weren't seeing one particular part, you certainly are going to be able to see it elsewhere and put the pieces together. So, therefore, verse 13, I will shake the heavens, and the earth will be moved out of her place, and the wrath of the Lord of hosts, and in that day of his fierce anger, it shall be as a hunted gazelle. What is it? The world. So what's the world? What would it look like from a third party just watching it from a distance when the world is put on notice? And when God is avenging and when God is actually judging the earth, what would humanity look like? What will the nations look like? What will the individual look like that's trying to escape the wrath of God? Remember, we just read in Revelation, just as they did in chapter 6, they're doing again in chapter 17, blaspheming and cursing God for their predicament that was completely avoidable, by the way. That's not the people who have pledged their allegiance to God long before. These are for the people that are walking in rebellion. That's who's being spoken of in Revelation and here as well. So what will they look like? Well, it'll be like a person that would be able to look at a gazelle that's being hunted, or as a sheep that has no man to take it up. So it's being, moved upon by the predators, and there's no one there to guard it. That's what it's going to look like. Every man will turn to his own people, and everyone will flee to his own land. Wherever they were, again, whether it's Babylon or wherever else it is, they're going to scatter, trying to look for something familiar, something that's a place of safety. So this goes well beyond Babylon. This goes well beyond all that, because again, now it's worldwide. Will it apply to what happens at the time when God moves on the actual place of Babylon? Yes. Will this be like this for everyone, everywhere that's being judged, and it's universal during that time, during the tribulation? Yeah, people are going to do anything that they can to preserve themselves to the familiar things. So it says everyone who is found will be thrust through, and everyone who is captured will fall by the sword. So again, those escaping Babylon, or the ones, whoever is engaged in something that would be seemingly warfare, and there's plenty of it in Revelation. There's plenty of it that takes place during that time of man killing man. The craziness of it. When you read through it, it's amazing. Their children also will be dashed into pieces before their eyes. Their houses will be plundered, and their wives ravished. So when there is no governing authority anymore, when God allows the earth to be judged, and they do things to themselves, but God is the one who is ultimately saying, I bring this judgment upon you. Still, he's the one who sets the parameters, but man will do what man will do. So again, nothing governing them. Man left to his own resources will do these things. Now, look at what it says in verse 17, because now it seems as though there's a break, because now he talks about the Persians, or the Medes in this case. So that would make us think instantly, okay, so then that means maybe through verses 16, he's only talking about the future Babylon, but he's going to deal with, for the remainder of the chapter, he's going to just deal with Babylon that's in the near future of Isaiah's time, that will actually move upon Judah, that will actually be defeated by the Persians under Cyrus within a couple of hundred years of Isaiah's writing. Okay, if verse 17 was all that we had, that makes sense. Behold, I will stir up the Medes against them, who will not regard silver, and as for gold, they will not delight in it. Also their bows will dash the young men in pieces, and they will have no pity on the fruit of the womb. Their eye will not spare the children. So does that speak about, when it ultimately becomes the case when the Medes would come in? Well, we don't have a lot of that detail necessarily. We know that it was conquered, but this is more detail than we might have if it's only speaking about what will take place to them in the very near future. Because it not too long, he goes back to a very universal kind of a judgment that's taking place, which really moves us back into thinking more Revelation. So look at what we see in verse 18 or verse 19. And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldeans' pride, will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, well, that's a big deal because remember, by the time Daniel is doing what he's doing, he's writing from the citadel. He's writing from Babylon. So he was there at the time. It clearly was not wiped out the same way. So if I had somebody ask me recently, do you ever go to the places where they believe Sodom and Gomorrah were? And the operative in that is where they think it might be. Nobody knows for sure because God laid waste to it, so much so that people have their theories about where it might be, but you don't know for absolutely sure because God's done with it. He destroyed it and it's done. Now, Babylon was conquered, absolutely, but the Medes didn't completely destroy it, and people still live there to this day. It's nowhere near what it was. It's not the hub. It's not the world power that it was. And even within Iraq, modern day Iraq, it's not the place. It's, that's Baghdad is the capital. Babylon is something that, of course, is of great importance historically. It reminds them of their history as they would see it, but that's not their seat of power anymore. So it's a different place. But look at what's being described here because it's different. It will never be inhabited, verse 20 says, nor will it be settled from generation to generation, nor will the Arabian pitch tents there, nor will the shepherds make their sheepfolds in that place. But wild beasts in the desert will lie there, and their houses will be full of owls. Ostriches will dwell there, and goats will caper there. So you can read the description of what happens at the total destruction of Babylon in Revelation, and it sounds like this. It's just a place for beasts, and even demons are mentioned, that's the place where they wind up for the time until they're finally judged. That just gives you an idea that we've never seen this historically. So the Medes are mentioned, and they would be in that timeline as God sees it. I'm going to use the Medes, but the day's going to come when my destruction of it will be so complete, no one will ever be there again. Only the only things that will inhabit it are wild animals. So it says, the hyenas will howl in their citadels and jackals in their pleasant palaces. Her time is near to come, and her days will not be prolonged. So that's going to come. And again, this is the nearness that seeing it from God's point of view is different than what we see. And we always try to look at the English of this and say, well, if it hasn't happened already, well, then what's going on? And they look at the same kind of mentality happens when we look at Jesus's words about these things must happen soon. It's when we look at the original language tells us it's not that it has to happen chronologically soon or quickly. It's when they start to take place. It's the speed with which they will take place when they begin to take place. That's the way that we understand it. So better for us to not read into the text, but read the text for what it says, and then make sure that we try to we put it where it fits and not where we want it to fit, or we can make it fit to our own satisfaction. The Bible doesn't need our help interpreting it. So we want to go with where the Scripture takes us. So we're going to pick up at chapter 14 because it's there's still the same subject, still dealing with Babylon, but there's a different look at it, which I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. We'll pick that up next week. I want to go over, if I could now, something that when it comes to the gospel, what is meant by the gospel. And I think it's helpful for us when we look at the Bible itself. This came up in a discussion that we had at church, and I want to turn there. Let's go ahead and look at Romans chapter 15. And what I'm going to do over these next couple, maybe 2 or 3 studies, remember I do these at the end of each one of the Bible studies. And at the end of this this particular study, and then maybe for the next 1 or 2, I want to go over this topic of what is the gospel. Because the question came up in our men's fellowship as we get together and discuss. We're actually going through the book of Romans here, and it's an interactive thing. It's for people to ask questions and have input and all that stuff, and it's just guys sitting around going through God's Word. And so in chapter 1, we get this, where Paul says that I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and then also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, that is, as it is written, the just will live by faith. So when we see gospel, it's the Greek word euangelion, and it's used 77 times in the text. And so if I ask most people, what's the gospel? Oh, it's the good news. The good news of what? And sometimes we almost think about it in more of a formulaic way. Well, it's the preaching of the gospel is to tell them about Jesus and about him dying on the cross and the forgiveness of sins. That's a very, very good word. It's very good news. Indeed, the gospel, as we think about it that way, is really wonderful. So would the gospel sound a little bit different to the Jew versus the Gentile? Because he says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. I'm not going to shy away from it. I embrace it. The gospel, the good news, because it is the power to salvation, to make people know what salvation really is. And it begins with the Jew, and then it also makes it to the Greek. So if we think about this, if you were going to a church, or not a church, let's say a church, and you're Paul, and there's a group of people there that are believers, and they're in that part of the world, let's say in the pagan world, and you're going in to visit them. And maybe there's a bunch of people there that are not committed believers, but they're there out of curiosity. And Paul, you're the one who's tasked with talking to them. So Paul sizes up the room, and he sees it, and it's filled with a bunch of Gentiles that really don't know much of the historical history, the historical aspects of Israel and who Jesus is and what's the Messiah and all the rest of it. You don't go back to saying, well, I'm here to tell you about the promise that was made to Abraham 4,000 or 2,000 years ago, in that through him all of the nations would be blessed. But that was what he had said to him after he had called him out of Ur, the Chaldees. You say that to a bunch of Gentiles, and they're going to look at you like, I need a history lesson because I don't know any of that stuff. If he goes into a synagogue and he starts to talk about the exact same thing, they understand it. It's their common history. So the good news is something that is understood a little bit different depending on your audience, and that's what we're going to look at over the next couple of sessions after this. So the good news itself is something that we want to basically say, how do we cover the matter of the good news? So if it was something that I say, okay, the gospel, so I don't get stuck in doing formula, if I wanted to talk about the good news that is found in the Bible, and how does it apply to the person that I might be talking about it at the market or something like that, we would want to get to the point of Jesus and the need for sin. Well, they're going to look at you like, if they don't even understand what sin is, then you have to cover that too. So how far do you go back? Where did the good news begin? And so if we're looking at it like that, when Paul says here, I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, we're able to take a look at the things that he had said, and we'll do that. We're going to take a look at what happens when he was talking to the first audience. So depending on what I've got for time, excuse me, if people don't really have a good concept of what sin is, I can go back to the very beginning of everything and be able to say, look, here's what I can tell you, that God created everything that you can see around you, and he created it in a perfect sense. It was exactly as he had wanted it to be. There was no corruption. There was no death. There was no anything. It was a perfect situation. In fact, when God looked at his creation, he's the one who said it's perfect. It needs nothing. And he brings man into the equation and gives man every conceivable option to do everything that he could, and yet man was only forbidden from doing one thing, and man rebelled. And because of that, death entered into the world. And we can, if we're talking with somebody, we can say, Paul told us about that. So death enters into the world, and because of that, because of that sin, death enters in, and that becomes a cycle that never ends. So when is there going to be an end to this whole cycle of sin and death and all the rest of it? That's part of the good news. So remembering that when it comes to God who is perfect, has to look at man who is imperfect, and how do you reconcile those things? Because the Bible tells us that anybody who has fallen short of what he has required of us, there's no hope for us. There's nothing that we can do to fix that problem. And so God sees that and says, but that's not an acceptable outcome as far as I'm concerned. So he's going to do the one thing that we cannot do for ourselves, and he will give us the means of forgiveness. Because again, sin and death, that whole cycle has now been introduced into mankind. And if you're trying to talk to somebody, they may not really fully understand the whole side of that, but I look at them and say, do you ever get to the point where you look at the stuff going on around the world and say, is this all that there is? Is there really nothing more than this? Is this the never-ending cycle? Is this what man is just kind of resolved to do? And it seems to get worse. It doesn't seem to get any better. So is that all that there is? I want them to kind of work through that. So the gospel. Is this really all that there is? Because the Bible would tell us no, because God said, look, I created it perfect. Perfect is what I want. And the Bible tells us that he's going to get it there again. He's going to put it back the way that it was. So in between here and there, what's the individual to do? Well, the good news is that God says, I will not have man in that condition forever. He'll take matters into his own hands. There will be a sacrifice that will be made. It will be done through the person of Jesus, who offered himself to pay the price of my sin. The wages of sin is death, is what the Bible tells us. So the good news is that God wants to have us reconciled to him, but we can't do that reconciliation ourselves. He's provided for that. That's good news. It's great news. So what happens after that? Well, after that, from the time that a person could actually come to God and say, forgive me of what I've done, I want to be reconciled to you, I'm tired with what I see around me, and this can't be all that there is. When God tells you that there's more to it, then we begin to understand and learn about who he is. Doing the things that we're doing and studying through the Bible. Looking for the forever kingdom, what he has promised to us, what we call heaven. That all of that has been made possible. Now, what we're going to do over the next couple of times is look what Paul had to say, depending on who his audience is. But you'll notice that Paul never is so narrowly focused to just say the gospel is really just something that took place, and the good news is really something that only happened over like a 2 or 3 day period. That was it. Jesus was tried, put on the cross, died, resurrected, and ascended into heaven. Okay, all of that is really great news. It really genuinely is. But if we don't know what goes on before or after, we're only giving a part of the news. Yeah, it's good news, but it's by no means the fullness of it. So again, knowing the good news and how do we give that to someone who doesn't know it? How do we make that known to the person who's not familiar with it? It's best that we understand that sometimes the audience is going to dictate how you get across or get to that point where you talk about those things. Again, Paul doesn't lead with that when he talks with them. He sees who the audience is, and he gets the opportunity to say, here's my door in, here's my open door to begin the whole process of explaining it from the beginning. So again, the good news, once again, the good news for me, when I think of the gospel, the good news, it is that God created everything perfect, but man through his rebellion broke that. And now it's broken to the point where no man can do anything to fix it. So God has taken it upon himself to do precisely that. Jesus came into this world knowing exactly what he was to do. He did that exactly like he was supposed to. He offered himself that he could pay the price that I could not pay for myself. And what he has promised to me as an eternity being gathered back to him, and will be done with this cycle of on again, off again, life and death, this human existence that is just filled with misery with no end in sight. There is indeed an end in sight when we consider what the Bible says. What the Bible tells me, and I think about this more every day because I'm getting older, that the day will come when I will not age any longer. I will actually be recycled, fixed, done, brand new. Actually, the Bible tells me I got a brand new body and not recycled. I'm going to be brought to him in perfect condition, eternal, and redeemed. And I'll be back the way that it was when it was Adam and Eve, which I believe is literal, that there were literally these two people, Adam and Eve, and they walked perfectly. They were eternal. They never would have saw physical death. They only found physical death through sin and disobedience. And it has plagued humankind since. That day is coming to an end. That's the good news. So that would begin the whole process of finding out, well, what happens after I come to him and learn about what it is to be forgiven and cleansed. So we'll talk about that over the next couple of weeks. If by chance you have never come to that point, or you would like much more detail, I'm doing this very quickly as a short. If you would like more detail on that, please contact me. The ministry's website is oldpaththeology.net, and it's very, very important that we study through these things and understand it. Let's do this. Let's compare what all the other belief systems in the world have ever taught. What does the Bible have to say about life and the cycle of life and death and all that? Let's compare it to every other belief that has ever been known to man, and let's see what actually stacks up against what we can see in the observable universe and what we know of the human existence. Let's do that. Let's have that conversation. Let's compare all things one against another, and let's see if we can come to the point of recognizing that the Bible makes a unique series of things said about mankind and what is future, and God has made a lot of, or taken a lot of time, as we would understand it, to tell us things in advance that no other religion ever tries to do. God is able to tell you because he exists outside of our time, and he tells you about these things. The gospel is part of that, or that is part of the gospel. The good news is that God communicates with his people, and he communicates to mankind as a whole. Whether they will ever listen to him or not is up to them, but he still is nonetheless the God of the nations. That's the good news. So we'll be picking up that over the next 1 or 2 sessions together, looking through the defining of what is the gospel and how do we define the term.